So we can now move on to step 13, which is attaching the rear suspension shafts. So these are all the screws that we're going to need, and then you've got these rear suspension shafts themselves, which actually have quite a bit of weight to them. So what we're going to do is first put that in place, but then you can see that it looks like there's also parts of where the battery would go, and these are all of the plastic parts that are going to be attached to the chassis. So let's first start here and get these ends on and build the shafts. So this is a pretty interesting design. I actually went ahead and put the first one in because I just wanted to see how it was going to fit. Because this is obviously where the rear suspension arms are going to attach when it comes time to doing so. So these shafts here are actually pretty substantial. There's a fair bit of weight to them. So you put this into the hole, and then we're going to grab this part here. It goes into the hole, which basically is holding this in place. And then we grab the other part, and we're going to same idea. This is going to go inside the hole, and then we attach that, put that on the other side, and then this part is going to screw down. Now it's a little difficult how it's set up just to do this on camera as well, so I am going to turn this over and screw this in, but essentially that is how it's going to look. The two shafts that are going to attach to that rear arm, which then gets attached to the shocks. So I'll just tighten this up and then we'll come back. Okay, so that is now on solid. So you can see that the screws are coming in on the top side, and they're actually indented so that those screws are completely out of the way. And then it just gets screwed down tight, and then you've got the two metal shafts coming out on either side. And they are able to move around just the way that's been designed, so there's the free motion there. So that is it. So now what we're going to do is move on to attaching these two other pieces, which I think has something to do with where the battery goes anyway. So for this step, you can see that it's going to be this piece because it has that part, because the other side is completely solid. And then you're going to grab the basically it's kind of like a roll cage in a sense, and you can see that this hole and that little protrusion, big word, protrusion is going to go onto that, more or less, once the screws are down. So then that's going to fit on top of that, and then the two screws are going to go inside. So if you see here, that has to fit on here, and you can see that this part here goes into an actual hole on the side of the chassis. So that is it. And technically, if I just grab one of the screws for now, come on, let's find the hole. There we go. It seems like it wants to screw in too, which is interesting. Not sure why that is, but the thing is, now that we've got this, we can screw it in. And it's going in, but I'm just going to do it temporarily so that I can get the other one on. So same idea. There we go. Screw that in as well at the same time. Bit of an awkward position, as you can see here. In fact, I might just do it differently. I'm going to grab a different tool and just put it on. So I'll just come back. I'm going to try and get this on, and then we'll take a look at the other side. So that was actually a bit awkward because my screwdriver, I've got the Tamiya screwdriver set, it barely fits inside there, and so it was a bit difficult trying to get leverage to try and screw that in. But essentially that is now how it's supposed to be. It is on there nice and tight. So what we're going to do is the exact same thing but on the other side. So that is going to fit on top of there. It kind of snaps into place there's a piece that goes into the black plastic on the other side. And then of course we're going to do the same sort of thing. That goes in the center, and then the two screws on either side here, which I think again I'm going to end up doing off camera because it is not an easy thing to get the screw in far enough, because the screwdriver is it's in a very awkward position. So I'll do this off camera, we'll come back, and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so that is all now attached. So we've got those bumpers on either side. I guess you'd call them the side bumpers. It looks pretty good. I'm liking this. And it was pretty difficult because that really barely fits in there. I would have probably needed to find another tool, but I muddled through it, got it done. So we can now move on to step 14, which is attaching the gearbox stays. So there are all the screws and parts that we need for this step, but this step was a bit befuddling. Is that a good word for this? I don't know. I've not seen this before. So you can see that these two things, which I guess are the gearbox stays, they're identical pieces, and they go into the chassis just like that on both sides. But you'll notice that on this one, you come up from the bottom with a tapping screw and a washer, which screws in, and you can see the top of the screw or the bottom of the screw is coming through the plastic. So you can see that there. And to be honest, to do that, it is way easier to just flip the car over and screw it in from this side and screw down rather than trying to screw up. So I'm not sure what that's all about. But then when I looked at the other one, you can see that it's just a regular threaded screw that goes down. So see how it's the same thing, but this one the screw goes up, this one the screw goes down, and it's going to go into this, then the washer, then a spacer, and then a nut. Yet the part itself is identical on either side, so I'm a little confused as to why it's a completely different way of installing it. Now, because it's weird, I thought this might just pop into the hole. It doesn't. I still have to screw it in because it's not, the space isn't, or I should say the opening isn't big enough for that to just slide all the way to the bottom. So I'm still having to screw that in. So you can see on the one side, the screw has gone up. On this side, you can take the screw and go down. So I'm just going to do this off camera and kind of figure this out because it does seem like a very strange design. Now there may be a reason for it later on, I'm not sure, but that's where we're at right now. Okay, so I've tightened it down, but we'll see if this comes into play later because I'm still quite confused. See that stay right there, and it was screwed in from the bottom, one washer, one tapping screw, screwed nice and tight. The other one got screwed in from the top, and I had to screw it all the way down, and then it's tightened by a washer, a spacer, and a nut. Well, when you screw that up into there, because it's already a tight fitting screw, you can't go any farther once you screw it in, so you're going to have to work on that nut from the top. But you can't get the box wrench into that, so you have to use pliers to turn it. I don't know. I might be just slightly confused at this point, but it's done, and I've managed to get the other body pin in there, and you can note the direction of the hole. It's in place, so technically that step is completely done, but I'm still a little confused on this as to why it is the way it is. Maybe that'll come to light later on. So we will move on to step 15, which is putting together the roll cage. So there are the parts that we need for 15, and you can see that some of these still have to be cut off of part of the parts tree. So I'm just going to cut all that off, and then we'll get back to building it. Okay, so I've cut all of the plastic bits off so that we're left completely with the roll cage. And as you can see on this part, the top has to be attached with this metal bar, which is light aluminum, and you can see we're going to spin that onto there, and then you take the other one and do the same, and you just have to keep rotating this until it's all the way on. Dun, 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 dun. There we go. And then ultimately it's going to be like that. Now I'm going to just check it and tighten it up a little bit more, but other than that, that ends up being our roll cage. So that part's done, other than me just doing a quick check to tighten it up. And then we can start installing that roll cage onto the chassis in step 16. Okay, so you can see that the screw parts in the roll cage are going to go into the top part of the chassis, and then we have the two nuts, and that really is all that we're doing at this point, other than popping those where they need to go. But I think what's cool here is that the car is starting to really take shape. So if we put on the roll cage let's put the one into that hole, the one into the other hole, and down. Technically, this is now starting to look like the car. That just looks so cool. So I'll just tighten up the nuts because essentially that's all that's there, and I think you kind of can figure that one out. So I will just tighten up the nuts, and then you can see here we've got a body mount pin that has to go into the chassis, and I'll tighten that up, and then we'll just take a quick look before moving on to the next step. So here is the completed chassis up to this point. The roll cage is now nicely tightened onto the chassis, and those pins are actually, there were actually two of them. One of them is here and one of them is here, and the holes are aligned in the same way as the chassis for the pins, but that is it. Those were the only two things that we needed to do. So the car is finished up to this point. So we can now move on to step 17, which is starting to build the gearbox.